Hey, good afternoon or good morning, everybody, depending on where you are. First of all, a very warm welcome and thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule to be here today. I am very happy to see so many business owners looking to step up their game and to start to manage on metrics. This is, in my eyes, how you want your business to look like. A very organized, smooth flow of processes, people, transactions, where there is no central bottleneck and you as the owner have the full overview and have the full control. However, this is usually what it feels like to run a business. It may feel like a gridlock, where there's an intersection where all parts of your business come together. And that basically means that your whole business can get stuck into a gridlock where you may or may not be the center bottleneck or where the processes are the bottleneck. And that is what we're going to cover today, how to prevent that. A quick bit of housekeeping. I would like to make this as interactive as possible. So if you have any questions, please post them directly in the Q&A box and I will answer them directly if I can, or at worst case, I will cover them at the end in the Q&A section. We'll have a couple of polls throughout the webinar. They will pop up, you can just select your answer and that's it. And I will be recording this webinar and I will be sending you the link to that at the end of the session, so you can review it later on if you wish to do so. Now, before we dive in, a quick brief background about myself. I am Rob de Braake. I'm the founder of Inside Matters. And I have my entrepreneurial journey is quite diverse. I started in the Netherlands, where I was born and raised, spent a bit of time exploring entrepreneurship in Vietnam, went back to the Netherlands, worked in ING Bank, in the corporate bank, and spent then about 8 years working and being an entrepreneur in China, moved to Thailand a couple of years ago, and currently, thanks to the COVID situation, I have accidentally moved from Thailand to Budapest in Hungary, where we are currently residing. In that entrepreneurial journey, I founded a couple of companies along the way. I've co-founded some of them. Initially, SDS Ventures, that was my first steps into the entrepreneurship in China. And basically, we were building one company to launch several other technology companies underneath it. And I'm sharing you this because this is where I learned to work with KPI and why that is so incredibly important. Because at a certain point, at the heydays, we were working with 4 companies that we were controlling. And I was the CFO of all of them. I was controlling one of them fully. And I realized that I was one of those bottlenecks that I just described. We were having a team of about 20 people and I was completely lost in the overview. I was trying to manage everything by my expertise, by my own project management. But in the end, one of the reasons the companies were not growing as fast as we would like was because my management skill was not good enough, because I was not using KPIs the proper way. Then in 2017, I founded Able Finance, a finance and strategy consultancy. And initially we were working with Western-owned SaaS companies in China, but that quickly expanded into all sorts of online businesses and quite global. Working with SaaS, e-commerce and agencies mainly. And we ran into quite a few companies where we saw that they could benefit from getting better financial insights, where they could benefit from working with KPIs and more structured management and financial discipline, but they couldn't afford our consulting rates. And that was actually one of the key reasons to start Inside Matters earlier this year. We want to make that financial knowledge as much accessible as possible for that wider audience. And you will probably see there's a bit of interaction between finance and strategy and coaching in there, and that is exactly where I am. This fits both me and Inside Matters perfectly. Then a really brief note about Insight Matters, because I'm sure you're not looking for a promo talk on Insight Matters in this case. We basically provide entrepreneurs, business owners with financial reporting and analysis. We help them set KPIs. We help them to track and hold them accountable. So we help to hold the entrepreneurs as well as other people in the management team accountable on those key KPIs. And if I may quote Carly Fiorina, the former CEO of HP, Hewlett Packard, the philosophy of Insight Matters is pretty much this. We want to transform data that is available in the company into information and translate that information into insight, because it requires the insight, not only the data, but it requires the insight to make better decisions, to grow faster, to increase your profits, to reduce waste. And on the social, or on the more softer part, it requires insight in your company to feel more in control. And according to some of our clients, get a better night of sleep because of that. So what do? We basically provide monthly financial reports with a KPI dashboard, executive summary, and walkthrough videos through the results and reports to give the context and to give our insight that's easier conveyed through a video walkthrough than in a written document. As I mentioned, financial insights helps to grow faster, improve efficiency, and to be in control. Some of the companies we work with are mainly SaaS and e-commerce and agencies. So that's companies like Coworker, you may know, Datena, Influence Matters, a PR agency that kindly lent the inspiration for our name. MD Clinicals, a consultancy, and FK, FutureKind, a e-commerce company. So today I am going to use Angela a lot as an example. And the reason for that is that she is the perfect example for what we often see that goes wrong and how much they can improve by using metrics. Angela is a European lady. She runs a very niche consultancy company, and she is the expert. So much so that in her company, any question that the team has, in the end, Angela is the one who can answer it. And of course, the senior management below her can do a lot as well, but she is the #1 content expert. And I think that's very relevant because I expect a lot of you are also in that position. That also means that Angela is also the bottleneck in her company. Because she manages as a content expert, she manages on her expertise rather than on metrics and processes. And we'll cover in a bit why that is such a problem. To give a bit of a context about her company, she runs a company with about 12 consultants, does roughly $1.5 million in revenue, and she, as the expert founder, is working hard. She's working at least 80 hours a week. So this is where she came in and figured out we need to move to managing by metrics. So today we're going to cover 3 parts. Why you should manage on metrics, how to go about setting your KPIs, and third, how to measure and manage the KPIs, how to embed them in your organization. And the first part, why you should be managing on KPIs, is actually where I would like to hear your opinion or your experience. And that is where we have the first poll. I would be very curious, what is your key reason why you would want to move to managing on metrics? Yeah, okay. The vast majority wants to improve efficiency. About 2/3 wants to improve efficiency, and roughly 1/3 because the business gets too complex. Interesting. That's, to be honest, not what I expected. I expected more on the complex part, because that is exactly why I think it's so important, because it helps you to get control. And pilots are the ultimate example of that. They are flying a God knows how many tons machine through the air to a small piece of tarmac across the world. So they are fully reliant on the metrics on their dashboard, the airspeed, the fuel consumption, and these kind of things to manage their whole process. Because the plane is simply too complex to fly on their specific knowledge or even their gut feeling. And the same is true for running a business, especially when it gets bigger. It is like a plane or like a container ship. It's very big, it's slow to change course, and it's incredibly complex. So if you look at the right KPIs, if you manage to identify the right metrics, you can simplify the leadership of that organization, so you can keep control and set the direction for that whole organization. And indeed, the extra benefit is the efficiency. And my experience is that it mainly allows you to manage your team on outputs and results, rather than only looking at the numbers of the hours that they put in or the tasks that you give them. And it's an absolutely critical step to remove yourself as the bottleneck in your organization. The second part, how to set the KPIs. And we break that down into 3 parts. First of all, it's about setting your goal. Second, KPIs, and third, processes. But we start with the goal, because in the end, the goal decides where you want to take your business. It decides on what the right road is towards the goal and what the KPIs could or should be that will get you there. And so the key question, and that is, whoever we work with, that is the first and arguably the most important question that we ask. What are you optimizing for? What are you trying to achieve with your business? Are you trying to go to the moon? Are you trying to build a unicorn and like go big or go home? Are you trying to change the world for the better? For example, to clean up the plastic out of the ocean, or trying to reduce the impact of climate change? Or are you trying to just simply generate a life-changing or intergenerational wealth for your family? The key thing here is there is no wrong or right. Your goal is your goal. And no matter what that goal is, it is your goal. The rest of the world may have an opinion on it, may have different goals, but what is your driver is what it is. One thing is absolutely critical, and that is that you make it tangible. If you want to make that life-changing income, put a number on it. Is that 100K per year? Is that 5 million in the bank? If you want to clean up the ocean, how many kilos of plastic do you want to get from there? Is that 1,000 ton or 1,000,000 ton? Make it specific so you can have an idea if you're making it or not. A good friend of mine runs an agency business, and they help customers get reviews on social media platforms. And his ultimate goal is to plant 1 million trees. And for every review that they help their clients get, they add 1 tree. So his goal is very much aligned with his business strategy, but it's a very tangible goal. And that is where we are usually focused on in the KPI insight process. We really want to understand what's the goal and then drill down on what that means, not only for the company, but almost even more for the owner, because in the end, it's the owner, and we'll see that with Angela, who makes the big strategic decisions. So if we look at Angela, she was, when we asked, not really quite sure what her goal was. Initially, she was answering, I want to grow. I want to maximize the revenue of the business. I want to see how big I can make this. In second instance, she said, I want to be the #1 in the niche. So I want to be worldwide recognized as we are the #1 in this field. But none of that seemed to really match with how she was running the business. If you look at the hours she was making, if you look at how she was delegating the team, how she was talking about plans for the next couple of years, that did not really match. So we were poking a bit further. And then she finally mentioned something that she kind of didn't want to tell anybody in the team, and therefore was a bit reluctant to tell us initially as well. Her goal was to sell the company. And more specifically, she wanted to sell the company in about 3 years for $5 million. And there were a couple of reasons for that, but the most important reason for that was she wanted to stop working 80 hours a week. And she did not see how she could scale down her hours while still maximizing the growth of the company. And keep in mind, she was running the company on expertise. So she was the source of knowledge and the source of trust and the know-all, end-all in the company. So if she would tell her team that her goal was to sell the company, that may have an impact on the engagement with her and the team. So that's why she was a little bit reluctant to say that. But having this clear is incredibly important. And if you're running a company with a co-founder, it's really important you guys have a similar or even better, the same goal that you're trying to maximize the company for. So now you know what the goal is, what you're trying to optimize for. Then the question becomes, what are the KPIs that fit that trajectory? How can you translate all the steps from where you are now to when you're achieving your goal? How can you break those steps down, and how can you know what if you're on the right track or not? Before we dive in that, no matter how much I believe in tracking and managing on metrics, it is really important to keep in the back of your head this quote from Albert Einstein. Not everything that can be counted actually counts. And not everything that counts can be counted. There are things in your business, and especially on the HR part and the softer parts, that cannot be measured, but they are incredibly important. So keep in the back of your mind that metrics are critical, but they're not the whole story. So as you may or may not know, there are two types of KPIs, leading and lagging ones. And they are very interactive, but we'll dive into them one by one. The lagging KPIs, as the name kind of suggests, they are lagging the action. So you use them to analyze the past performance of your business. And they are usually very result-oriented. So they are looking backwards and they are focused on results. So they are not typically things you can directly influence. Typical lagging KPIs are revenue, profit, and of course, cash flow. So again, these are the consequences of your actions. There are you can take a lot of actions, but none of them will directly control revenue. They will impact revenue, but revenue is always the result of your action and the result of something else that happens after your action. It's a customer that signs, it's your team that goes a certain direction, but revenue is not under your direct control. That means it's a lagging KPI. On the opposite side, the leading KPIs, they are leading the action. So they are more forward-looking. So these are the things that control the future performance of your business. And they are very much action-oriented. They are very much focused on the control that you have over your activities, and therefore you can control these KPIs. Typical examples here are, for example, the number of leads that you have. You have a lot of impact by your actions on how many leads you have. Second is, for example, billable rates, your price levels. You set that. You have a lot of control over that. Your customers may push back and they may go for a cheaper alternative, or they may go for somebody else with a different positioning, but you have a lot of control over your billable rates. And the same, and please don't do this too much, you have a lot of control over the number of cold emails that you send, or the number of the amount of outreach that you do. So they are leading because they are very much directly under your control. And what we'll see in Angela's example in a second is it's very important to understand how they relate to each other. That you, if you understand your goal, translate those into the right lagging KPIs and translate that into the leading KPIs that you can influence. So if we're looking at Angela, her ultimate goal was to sell her company for roughly $5 million in 5 years. Now, based on valuation ratios, etc., we concluded that she would need to have a profit of about $675,000 in 1 year to make that goal achievable. And that is a very specific goal, but it's not something that you directly can control. So this is the ultimate lagging indicator in that sense. So we need to break this down into more manageable, more tangible items. So in order for her to get to 675,000 profit, we broke it down in 2 parts. How much revenue she needs to make and what profit margins she needs to realize on that revenue. And given the profit margins that she has been achieving so far, we concluded that this would be the right goal for her to aim for. 4.5 million in revenue and about 15% net profit ratio margin. As you can tell, they are both lagging. They are both the results of all the business operations. So they are not things that she controls, at least not directly. So we broke it down a level deeper. $4.5 million in revenue, again, based on her situation, and for you, it will depend on your company and on your clients, what is the right breakdown here. But for her, that would probably mean she would have to secure 45 projects that year with an average customer value of $100,000. And that's already much more clear and much more tangible. And if you look at the profit margin, again, based on her specific industry and niche, we would get to a 30% gross margin and about 55,000 in overhead budget every month. These are, again, a bit more concrete, a bit more tangible, but still they are lagging indicators because it's still not completely under your control. So if you break it down one level deeper, we get to this. For her to secure 45 projects, she would need 100 qualified leads and a 45% closing rate. When we started working with her, she was doing about 30 to 35% closing rate. So 45 is a stretch, but should be feasible. Sorry. And 100 qualified leads, that is something she has a lot of control over by controlling how much effort she puts on marketing, how many outreach they do, how much events they speak at, how much Facebook ad budget they would set. They have a lot of control over the amount of leads they generate. So that's why that one becomes the leading indicator. On the gross margin part, the client rates, how much they're charging, is very much under their control based on the proposals they send, based on the positioning in the market. They have a lot of influence on that. The cost of employees, they have a lot of influence on that as well. Where do you hire? What level do you hire? What age do you hire? Do you hire domestic or abroad? There's a lot of things you can control there. And the billable rates, what percentage of the time are the key consultants billable, is also quite manageable by timing the recruitment efforts. Marketing spend and customer acquisition costs, we wanted to break down a bit further. We haven't done that here simply because of lack of space, but you can make this in your own business as detailed as you want. And what you may already have noticed, the ones completely on the left are very much on the territory of the owner. You or the CEO or the owner of the shareholders, you own the goal. And probably the first layer of lagging indicators you own as well. But the further you get to the right, the more the KPIs become leading, and the more operational they become, the more you can delegate those KPIs to your team. In Angela's case, the 100 qualified leads was a direct KPI for the marketing person. The closing rate was a direct KPI for the salesperson. Angela was still doing the proposals herself and the pricing herself, so she was still keeping those. But all the others were off her plate and the ownership of somebody in her team. So the further you break it down, the more specific it becomes, the more you can delegate it to people in your team. And I would encourage all of you to run an exercise breaking down your goal into these KPIs yourself as well. It takes a couple of iterations probably, it takes some thought, but it will help you to understand better how your company organizes and what actually drives the results. So for Angela, we identified the two core lagging KPIs, revenue and profit margin, and the 6 leading KPIs, qualified leads, closing rates, client billable rates, hourly staff costs, how much billable percentage is how billable the team is in terms of time, and the acquisition costs. So far, so good. If there's any questions, please don't hesitate to put them in the Q&A box. Now, there are a couple of things that you want to avoid. There are 3 classic mistakes that we see a lot and that I would really hope you manage to avoid. The first one is measuring everything. Because when you start to measure everything and you consider everything important, in reality, that means nothing is important. If you think back to the pilot, they're looking at a couple of key metrics that are right in front of them. The airspeed, the fuel consumption, the fuel levels, and probably another couple of metrics. Then all the other metrics that are not so important are above their head or around the corner. So they don't really have a direct sight on that because they don't want to focus on those because they're not the core. And if you imagine that they would also spend their attention on tracking how many people are actually in their seats or how many people are drinking beer in the flight, those are completely irrelevant for the goal that they are trying to achieve. So it's very tempting to measure a lot, but make sure you don't measure everything, or at least you don't pretend everything is important, because that's simply not the case. Another example is in retail companies and also in law firms. I've heard that people have to track their time so detailed that they actually have to track the time that they spend in the bathroom. Now, and at that point, you really need to ask yourself, is that still making a relevant difference? The second classic mistake is focusing on details. And therefore losing the overview of the bigger picture. And when I was working in ING Bank, there was a fantastic example of that. The customer support call center had very strict cost budgets. They were considered a cost center, so they were managed to reduce costs. And one of the key elements to reduce cost is to make sure that either people call less or that the average time we spend on the phone with a client, with a customer, is as short as possible. So in ING, the call center had clear targets. The average conversation with the client should not take more than 2 or 3 minutes. And from a finance side, that made some sense. You want to limit the cost. But the result was, because they were so focused on that detail, that the call center agents had an incentive to cut conversations short, to tell people that things couldn't be fixed, or to tell them a solution that didn't work, but at least they would get them off the phone. So the result was that the number of calls was increasing, people were unhappy, customers were unhappy, unsatisfied, were less loyal. So in the end, it cost the bank actually more, because instead of having one 5-minute conversation, customers would call back 3 times, and the total time would be much more, plus they would be less happy. So it's very important when you set the KPIs to keep your eye on the bigger picture. Does that KPI fit in your bigger picture? And if you're having a small team, then this is not very likely a risk. But the second you start working with several management layers, where you give a head of a department a KPI, and he or she starts to break it down into the KPIs for the operational team, that's where you need to be aware that this is not becoming an issue. And the third one is vanity metrics. And vanity metrics, they look great, they make you feel good, but they don't add anything. And it depends a bit on the business what is and what is not a vanity metric, but in 99 out of the 100 cases, the number of followers you have on Twitter or the number of likes you get on your LinkedIn posts don't really have any relevant impact on your business. And there is one tricky vanity metric that I really want to emphasize that is a vanity metric if you don't deal with it the right way, and that is revenue. Revenue is a very useful metric, but it's also the most overvalued metric around. And a simple example is here. Let's say there are 2 companies. One company does 1 million in revenue, and the other company does $10 million in revenue. The second one sounds like it's 10 times as big, so it sounds like the one you want to own. But if I tell you that the one with 10 million makes exactly 0 profit, and the one with 1 million revenue makes 50% profit, I'm pretty sure all of us would rather have the $1 million revenue company than the $10 million one. So revenue is a really easy way to communicate something about the size of the business, but it's overvalued. Don't attach too much value on the health and the value of your business to revenue. And that is where I am also very curious to see which of these mistakes have you made, or do you recognize? And if it's any comfort, I too am still guilty of them. I find it difficult to limit how much of the how much metrics we should track or not, and even the vanity ones, I too am guilty of them. I still track the social media engagement. I still have an eye on how much people actually interact with LinkedIn posts, etc. Even though I know it has absolutely 0 impact on the health of the business. And let's give you guys another 10-15 seconds to vote. That is interesting. almost half say all of the above. And I appreciate the honesty. It's not easy to admit that that is an issue. Roughly 1 in 3 vanity metrics, and the remainder on too much focus on the details. But I appreciate the honesty. And I think being honest and open about the mistakes you make, because I kind of think everybody has made all of these. It's a really good start to improve to the next level. Then how to measure and manage the KPIs. And this is where it gets more tactical, because this is where we're going to dive into processes. Usually for most entrepreneurs, not the most sexy part of the business, but if you want to manage your metrics, having your processes in order is absolutely critical. And you want to have a standard operating procedure in place overall for sure, probably for each cluster of KPIs, and depending a little bit on how many KPIs you have, you probably want to have it per KPI and SOP as well. And the first step is make sure you appoint an owner of each of the KPIs. Who is actually in charge of delivering the results, of delivering these targets? And that for some cases, especially the ones further on to the left, the more high-level lagging ones, that's probably you as the owner. But the further you move to the right, that may or probably should move to other people in your team. Second one is the required input. For each of the KPIs, what information do you need to actually measure this KPI? For example, if the KPI you want to measure is the gross margin that you realize for each of your clients, then the 2 information points of input that you need is the revenue per client and the cost of goods sold of that client. Basically, this is breaking it down in the same way we did in the KPI breakdown, understanding what drives the KPI, what information do you need, and that may be a KPI in itself, and then the original source is one level deeper, and it may be a very direct input. The third one is the data sources. Where are you going to get the information for this KPI? And the most common places are the bookkeeping system, your CRM system, and your project management tool. And for consultancies, your time tracking software. Now, one of the most common problems we see here is that the bookkeeping is not suitable to track the KPIs that you want to track. For example, if you want to track your revenue and your gross margin per client, if in your bookkeeping system, all your revenue is lumped into one line and all your cost of service or your cost of goods sold is lumped into one line as well, it is almost impossible to easily extract the information about that particular client, and therefore you cannot see their revenue per client. Especially in consultants and agencies, what we see is that the time allocation of the team is not done accurately. If you work with a time tracking software, but your team is very relaxed about filling it in, so they may put time on the wrong project or they may put it on the wrong client even, that will almost devastate your ability to track those KPIs properly. And the fourth one, who is in charge of the reporting? Make sure that somebody is responsible to, on a certain frequency, track, analyze, and report on these data. And that could be, for some of the super leading operational ones, that could be on a daily basis. Number of emails sent, number of client calls made. Especially in bigger teams, that could be a daily KPI. In the slightly bigger ones, probably a weekly, but at the very least, it has to be a monthly one. But that only provides the value if actually somebody is responsible to track, analyze, and report it. And who is responsible for this could be the owner of the KPI, but it may also be somebody else. For a lot of the lagging KPI ones, usually the CEO or the founder is the owner of the KPI, but the CFO or the COO is probably the one who is in charge of the reporting. But have these roles identified will help a lot in securing the quality of your reporting. Then there are three common issues that we see in the financial information. One, lack of detail. I already briefly discussed this, but for example, Angela, she has 3 types of consulting services, but initially all the 3 types were lumped into one line of revenue in the P&L. So if you would look at the P&L, you would only see revenue. You would not see revenue type A, type B, and type C, only revenue. And that immediately makes it impossible to track the profit per service, profit per client. That undermines the detail, the amount of value you can get from these KPIs. So that's something to change. The other one is timelines. Again, in the case of Angela, they would get their financial reports, the KPI reporting, 4 weeks after the end of the month. So the July reports would only come at the last few days of August. And I've actually seen some companies doing their bookkeeping just once or twice a year. And that is a waste, because if you get, the reports have a lot of information for you to get the insight to make those better decisions. But that means you need to have that information fast, because if you make mistakes or if you're bleeding money in July, you're probably doing the same in August. So if you can only see that you're bleeding money in July, when it's the end of August, the whole month of August is lost. So when you then take an action in September to correct it, it will take you until the end of October before you see the effect. So then you're 4 months down the road. Well, if you see it in the first week of August, you have the whole month of August to take action. And in the first week of September, you already see if it has impact or not. So having that timeline as tight as possible on your reporting makes your life as an owner, as a CEO, so much easier. And the third one is surprisingly outdated details. And what I mean with that is companies evolve. You may initially be active in several types of services. So you may sell SEO audits and you may sell SEO packages. But if over time your business changes and you start to add more, let's say, consulting work, and you stop the other 2, if you do not update the breakdown of your financial reports, that will be an issue, because when you start doing consulting, where do you book that revenue? Is that an SEO audit? Is that, I forgot the other one, the other type of revenue? Actually, none of those fits. So you need to add a third one. And if you stop delivering the first 2, you may need to even remove those 2 from your books and from your reporting, so that the breakdown of your reports always is in line with how you look at the business. And if there's one small change, it's not a problem. You don't want to update your books every week or every month. But if you haven't gone a year without updating your books and your business has changed, there's a fair chance that there's a gap that obscures really important and valuable data from your company. Then looking again at Angela's KPIs, like I mentioned, for the lagging KPIs, let's focus there out of, for simplicity reasons. She was the owner of all the KPIs. In terms of the required inputs, the revenue per category is what we needed. The cost of service per category, overhead, marketing investments. Those were the critical ones to make sure we can calculate on time, all the key lagging KPIs for her. Data sources, everything should come from the bookkeeping. And reporting, initially the bookkeeper was in charge, but later on we took over because the bookkeeper was simply too busy, overwhelmed, and therefore couldn't deliver on time. In her case, the bottleneck was that we saw two of the bottlenecks. First of all, timesheets were inaccurate, and they were often too late as well. So I'll cover both of them at the same time. The timesheets took a week because the team was inaccurate. Then Angela had to check them, revise them, sign off on them. That would take a week. After the timesheets were done, they would finally start the invoicing, which would take a week. And after that, the bookkeeper could start the books. So they were actually 4 weeks behind. We have made some changes. They improved the timesheets to finish them in 1 day with some incentives for the team. Invoicing was done simultaneous because the timesheets were more accurate. The invoicing could be done faster. And bookkeeping, instead of doing it once a month, they started doing it on a weekly basis. So that means that instead of having the reports after 4 weeks, they had to resolve the reports already after 2 weeks. And that gave Angela a lot of extra insights to change the course, step up, and get closer to her goal in a faster pace than she could have done otherwise. So, in summary, step number 1 is make sure you set your goals, because everything else comes from your goals. Identify the right KPIs that lead up to your, that fit your goal. And 3, set up the processes that fit your KPIs and that fit your organization. Now, you may say that looks like a lot of work, and that's true because it actually is a lot of work. And to make sure that you can do this properly, we have set up the Insight Matters KPI audit. And so this whole process is exactly what we do. It's a very clear 4-step process. We start with an intake call where we dive into your goals to make sure that we fully understand what you're trying to optimize your business for. We draft the leading and lagging KPIs that fit that. Once we sign off on those, once we're on the same page with those, we go dive into your processes and your data sources to understand what you have and what needs to be changed. And we make an implementation roadmap for you that you can do with your team to implement the processes so that you can actually track those right KPIs. So that means at the end of the road, you would have a breakdown of your KPIs, a very clear overview of all the data sources that you need and where they come from, plus that roadmap. And from what we've understood so far from our clients, they feel that afterwards they are very much more clear on the path toward their goal, much more peace of mind. They feel that they are empowered and their team is empowered because they have much more clarity on what they should be doing, can grow faster. People feel they can make better decisions. Or as Max Hardy, the co-founder and CEO of 10x Travel put it, they were looking to get a very clear vision to be decisive and prepared about their finances. And partnering with Insight Matters was for them an absolute game changer. For the KPI audit, we usually charge $795 US for the whole process. But as I really appreciate you guys taking the time here to join us today, we are happy to offer a 25% discount and offer it to you guys for $595. Again, no pressure. Based on the webinar today, you could do it yourself. If you prefer that, you think like, hey, that's difficult, we want some help with that, we are of course happy to help you with it. If you want to take use of that offer, simply go to financeinsightmatters.com/KPI-audit. and use the code webinar25 at the checkout. And after, in the email that you get after the webinar with the recording, you will also get the link again and the code again. Then I would like to move to the Q&A. If you guys have any questions, please feel free to ask. The one question that we've got so far is, how many metrics is too many? And that actually comes back to, the answer is it depends. It comes back to the critical mistakes. You don't want to have too many, because if you have too many, you lose the overview. In Insight Matters, the dashboards that we make, we try to limit them to maximum 12 to 15 if it's company-wide. Ideally, the attention span of people is usually even a bit smaller, so 8 would be even better. But we found it extremely difficult to sketch the full picture of the whole company in 8 metrics or in 8 charts. So our experience is 12 is probably the best. If you really need to go to 15, that's okay, but don't go over that, because if you want to see the interaction between the leading and the lagging and get the full picture, too much data obscures it. And if there are no further questions, then I would like to thank you once again for taking the time to join. I hope you got a lot of value from it. And I would be really appreciated if you could, by email or whatever other channel, send me your feedback, what you picked up from it, and what you found good or what you found useful, and what not, of course. And thank you again, and I wish you a very good day.